Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of Anime Brain Freeze. We are your allergy-plagued hosts.
I am John.
And I'm CC, and this is the show where we sneeze and cough. Where we review all the anime series from the previous season we did and didn't watch, start to finish.
Yeah, so I'll try and mute my mic when I can, but I want to apologize to our listeners because the allergies are beating me up today.
Yeah, I don't have audible symptoms. Mostly my eyes are itchy, but yeah, I'm also plagued by the allergies, so... Summertime! It's a great time! Anyway, after our supersized episode 34, we will scale down a bit this time, and only talk about two shows. John is gonna wrap up today with the Danmachi spin-off, Sword Oratoria. But first, we shall return to the Kingdom of Midland and the many atrocious CG creatures that populated in my review the second season of Berserk. Let's get dangerous! I know I said before this episode will be a bit scaled down in terms of episode length, but I just took a look at my show notes for this review and... oh boy! So yeah. Anyway, what the hell happened? That is the question that was probably constantly echoing not only in my head, but in those of most Berserk fans while watching the first season of last year's new TV adaptation of Kentaro Miura's popular dark fantasy manga. Instead of a, beautifully crafted masterpiece, we got a... hideous CG abomination filled with stiff character models and overall janky animation and all that good stuff. In spring season this year, we got the second season. And while there was a small glimmer of hope that the production staff might be able to improve on the shortcomings of the first season, most viewers, me included, were skeptical about the chance of this, sinking ship getting turned around. And turns out we were all right.
Surprise, surprise, surprise.
The second season just looks just as bad as the first one. Better in some parts, worse in others. So yeah, what the hell happened? There's an article on ANN by Callum May, fittingly titled "What the Heck Happened to Berserk?" That gives some great insight into the troubled production of that show. And I recommend you reading it, but in case you don't want to spend additional time on that, I will bring up some of the interesting bullet points from that article in this review. So, yeah, be prepared for that. By the way, if you know nothing about Berserk, you can go back and listen to episode 21 of our show, where I reviewed the first season, giving a bit of an introduction for people who haven't seen the movies and everything and are not familiar with the manga. So yeah, maybe if you haven't heard anything about that show before, maybe you want to go back to that episode and listen to it first. Now, I think what's most well known about this new TV adaptation of Berserk at this point is how stiff and low budget its animation looks. John, you're probably also all too familiar with that at this point.
I have seen several snippets on Twitter and on YouTube, and all I can say to myself is, why?
Yeah, there have been many hilarious GIFs circulating on the web of the show's worst moments, animation-wise. You can check out at @quality_anime on Twitter for some of the best ones. And recently the producer of the animated Castlevania Netflix show mentioned that when they were looking for inspiration for the look of the show, among other things, they went for the old show, the old Berserk adaptation, to see what to do, and to the new one to see what definitely not to do. So that made me laugh. So yeah, this show has reached infamous acclaim at this point, for better or worse, mostly for worse. Now, why does the show look this way? According to the ANN article, the show's visuals turned out the way they did due to pretty much a clusterfuck of misguided ambition and tech problems. So the studio responsible for the production, Gemba, I don't know how it's pronounced, was never in charge of a full-length animation production before. So as their first big project, they get to adapt a behemoth like Berserk, which is just in terms of scale of the story and of the universe and the art and everything, it's just a giant-ass fucking project and a real difficult task. So, they're enough of their plate as it is. But not only that, They want to do it with new and untested, very taxing CG animation techniques and tools. So this is not the most rock-solid foundation to begin with, as it stands. And if you add to that the director, Shin Itagaki, who has or had a very specific vision for the look of the show, which turned out to be very hard to realize. He wanted to bring Miura's very detailed and line-heavy artwork to the screen without much compromise. And that, endeavor cost, because it was very taxing and work-intensive, and a lot of people were doubting that it was even possible. As it turns out, those people were right. That caused friction between him and the production staff, and, caused a lot of delays in terms of the production schedule of the show, which, Gamba had also have to get acquainted with, because they hadn't done scheduling a giant ass production like this before. They didn't only have to handle the animation side of things, but they also had to handle the scheduling. And so, this sounds really overwhelming, and it sure looks like they were overwhelmed. So the show started production in spring 2015, and they only decided in December of that year what the actual look of the show is gonna be. They had a teaser trailer produced in August, but the style of that still wasn't where Itagaki wanted it to be. And so it took them until December to reach a compromise with the director. But sadly, that also meant they had to throw away all the character models and assets they had already created and start over by creating 150 new models from scratch. Oof. In a much shorter time frame now. And as if that didn't, if that didn't waste enough time already, it turned out those new models were too detailed for their hardware to handle the rendering process. John, I don't know if you're familiar with it. I don't know how beefy your machine is, but for anyone who has never rendered a video or something on a computer, if your machine is not powerful enough, if you don't have enough RAM, if you don't have enough processing power, if your graphics card is not powerful enough, it either takes forever to render, certain things. I'm just saying videos in this case, especially if they're effects heavy or anything, or if there are a lot of cuts and transitions. It either takes forever or it will simply crash. That's what happened to me a lot. When I did a video where there were a lot of mixed up transition effects, constantly crashed. And in the beginning, because I didn't know anything about it, I didn't know what to do. And it turns out, my PC didn't have enough RAM and didn't have enough processing power. So, they were running apparently into a similar problem. So they had to turn down the models quality-wise and, make them less detailed. And they couldn't use a new lighting tool for the backgrounds because that would have taken too much time to render as well, because of the lag in tech and everything.
This all kind of reminds me, and this might sound like a dumb comparison to make, of what Final Fantasy XIV was, except, not what it became.
Yeah.
Because what you're saying is, back when it was still in the 1.0 patch cycle, I remember them saying, look how detailed everything is. And you'd have, a potted plant that would have as many polys as a player character. And it's you think that's going to bog things down just a bit?
Yeah, pretty much. And, sadly, they didn't have Yoshi P at their hand to pull the stuff out of the gutter. There were more technical problems. The one of the style choices that the show made, or that Itagaki made for the show, I think that came from his corner, was to put these touch-up line, or that's what they're calling them, the touch-up lines on character models and web models and everything that look like this line shading, makes it look a bit manga page-esque. So that was supposed to be applied automatically to the models, and that didn't always work out correctly. So they had to find workarounds, sometimes do it manually. So again, more time intensive than they expected, than they wanted. This all shortened basically the production time of the show to a bare minimum, and much less than it needed. So they had to deal with a bunch of these tech problems in their first big production. They had to create a lot of custom tools to create workarounds for all these issues. They had to find common ground with an ambitious director, and time was constantly running out. So I guess it had to that project had to turn out the way it did. Or did it? Callum states in this article that, quote, 3D animation is the only practical way to adapt Berserk to a television series in today's anime production environment. With the huge amount of detail present in Kentaro Miura's original artwork, finding a team that could constantly animate such complexity would be extremely difficult. My question is it though? I feel like...
I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, I really wonder why this always gets used as an excuse for the style choice they made in this show when it comes to this adaptation, and why this is the default. Like, this is only possible in 3D. Yes, Miura's artwork can be incredibly detailed and dense. Some of the frames in the Berserk mangas, I know you've seen some frames of that too online. Some of those are just a beautiful or disgusting whirlwind of lines and many bodies intermingled, almost fusing with each other. But the whole manga, no. Some of the scenes are simply normal, pretty still detailed, but something you can adapt, something that can be simplified without losing, its original style or losing its intended artwork and atmosphere. Some of the scenes are simply characters talking to each other or standing around or just walking. Yes, they probably couldn't have adapted the more complex line work of Miura's art on a consistent basis in 2D, but I'd say they wouldn't have to. I'd say we would have been content with a more uneven design landscape in the series if some of the more standard animation stuff would have been more consistent and more good looking, like characters talking to each other, characters walking side by side, standard battle animation, some panning shots across certain characters and everything. Yeah, the 3D models are all, on model all the time. That's how they are designed because, they always look the same. But still, there's a lot of stuff lost in the process. But let's look at the benefits, the CG brings. You get a lot of movement during fight scenes, as I've mentioned in my earlier review. And yeah, there were some pretty riveting action highlights in the second season. There's a big fight where Guts and his newly acquired fellowship, RPG party, whatever you might want to call it, battle a horde of trolls. And there are some really cool moments in there. But still, every time the action slows down, the shortcomings of the limited animation of the character models becomes painfully obvious. Of course, the negative standout moments in that regard are the dialogue scenes, like I've mentioned before. Yes, instead of your normal shot, cut, reverse shot, etc. scenes, you also get a lot of camera movement there, panning around and zooming in and out on the characters in those scenes. But honestly, I found it to be more distracting than immersive in those cases, because when characters are talking to each other and it's an important conversation, you want to focus on what is being said. And if the camera is constantly moving around, because it's a 3D show, so it's easy to move the camera around all the time, and you want to make it look impressive, but that takes away the focus from what it should be on, and that is what the characters are saying. And that happened a lot in that show, like when characters talking to each other and then the camera is circling around and circling back and forth. I'm like, yeah, this looks interesting, this looks new, but I'm missing out on what the characters are saying because I'm not focused on what they're actually talking about. You didn't even really get a benefit of the CG there, even if there was a lot of added camera movement that was only possible because of the CG on such a consistent basis. And if you add to that the lack of subtle facial gestures and weird stiff mouth movements that come with the use of CG, and pretty much all the dialogue scenes in this show look terrible. That's how it is. There are some hand-drawn scenes in this season as well as in the first one. For example, a fourth of episode 17 is done in traditional animation. And of course it looks better. The characters are way more expressive and their movement just feels more lively and natural. So yeah, you not only get to see the CG being shitty in itself, but you also get the comparison in the same show, in the same episode, to a style that is much better.
Jeez.
And it's not that much better that I would say, oh, this wouldn't be possible if the rest of the show wasn't in CG. Like, wow, this looks so good. This is like over standard anime TV budget. No, it looks really good, but it doesn't look above like some of the, better looking 2D traditional animation shows. It's not like it's an explanation for why the CG was chosen. That they had to choose it to give you like these amazing 2D scenes that they sprinkle in between. It really doesn't feel like it. I mean, credit where credit is due. Some of the backgrounds on the show look really cool, and despite its otherwise mostly shitty animation, the show is incredibly good at building a tense atmosphere, as it should. You know, this is a dark fantasy story. This is important. But eventually there's always some janky visual that kills the immersion. It's a character moving really stiffly. I don't know if you've seen the gif of Gus just, you know, walking weirdly stuttery out of the frame.
Yeah, like shimmying toward the camera.
Yeah. I should really link that in our, in our episode post on our website or something, or some of the best gifs, because, yeah, there's some good stuff out there.
I remember seeing someone in response being like, "Hey, look, I'm an animator in Berserk," and like took an image of him in like Photoshop or Paint or whatever, just like cut him and then just off the screen.
Yeah, pretty much. And man, it's like, okay, the 3D fight scenes look cool most of the time, and the camera movement is great and everything, and I get pulled into the action. And the characters stop and start talking to each other like, okay, I'm out. This is not working. Can't you see this is not working? Anyway, let's talk about the story a bit, because I haven't done that yet, and I really need to talk about something positive here. So the last time we met Guts, he just witnessed the rebirth of his former friend, now turned hated enemy Griffith. And at the beginning of this season, the two have a short clash, but only for Griffith to confirm that Guts is not a threat for his dreams anymore, at least not in his, at his current power level. And yeah, so Guts realizes that too, he doesn't really, but he shifts his priorities elsewhere and decides to bring his love, Casca, to the home of his elf companion Puck, because the king of the elves might be able to return her to her former self. She's not right since the event of the eclipse, which happened in the movies or in the manga. And yeah, he wants to remedy that. And on their journey, they are permanently joined by a lot of characters introduced in the first season. The former Holy Knight Farnese, her aide Serpico, and the little monkey-faced thief Isidro, who decided to become Guts' apprentice. And during the course of the season, they also meet one of the best characters in the whole series, the little witch girl Schirke, and they all have to work together to stand against the dark forces standing in their way. While Griffith, at the same time, assembles his own team of formidable warriors, to achieve an, as of yet, unknown goal. So there's a lot of stuff happening and a lot of characters to deal with and character dynamics and interaction. So it's all very interesting and riveting stuff. And I think Farnese has probably the most interesting arc during the course of both seasons, because she starts out as a noble and basically a Christian fundamentalist. She's like, burn all those sinners at the stakes, and I'm gonna wash their souls clean and everything. She's a real asshole at the beginning of the first season. And, it's a front. She hides her weakness by clinging to her fanaticism. But her encounter with Guts and the horrors that follow him force her to question her beliefs, and she becomes an entirely different and much stronger person, especially in the second season. We also learn a lot more about her past in this season, and what part Serpico, who's like the cool guy, the cool, mysterious, quick sword fighter of this show, which part he has played and what connects him to her past. It's really good character stuff. Schirke, of course, like I said, is one of the best characters in the series. She's very likable. She can kick some major ass with her magic spells. And she and Guts develop a great dynamic. I really like their dialogue scenes together and how their relationship develops and everything. So every scene where she is the focus is fantastic. Isidro and Puck form the comedic relief duo of the series, as they have already done in the first season. And they deliver a lot of comedy gold. Mostly if there's like a super deformed scene or anything, it involves those two. Puck basically has like these two forms in this show where he looks like normal elf boy Puck, and every time something funny happens, he's like this fat, weird elf version of himself. It's really funny. But yeah, those two are great. And regarding our main character, I'm kind of bummed that they decided to skip a lot of the Black Swordsman arc, where Guts and Puck are traveling alone, because we kind of miss out on Guts' time of solitude and isolation after, the stuff that happened on the eclipse, the solar eclipse. So him slowly opening up to other people again after being so violently betrayed by his former best friend and everything, it doesn't quite have the same impact or relevance as in the manga. So I was missing out a bit on that, but I think if you haven't read the manga, you won't notice that at all. It's just, it's like I said, for me, in the manga it had a bit more impact, because in the beginning Guts is like displayed at this gruff soldier who's very cynical and who's lost pretty much all hope in humanity and the world and everything. And Puck like slowly brings him back a bit and opens him up to be honest to himself and be honest about his feelings and everything. And, Guts in the beginning also is a bit cold to, his new party members, but then he slowly opens up, and it all makes sense if you can contrast that to his former self. And now it's pretty much like, okay, solar eclipse happens. If you're watching the movies and the show, solar eclipse happens, he's a bit grumpy, and then he becomes friends with Puck and Isidro, and then with the rest of the gang pretty fast. So it's like, okay, maybe he wasn't so sad. Anyway. But yeah, it still works. It still works. You still notice that there's a lot brewing under the hood for Guts there. But yeah, despite my qualms about that, the story of Berserk is still fantastic. It always was this real engrossing, dark fantasy tale with well-developed, complex characters, even on the still page. And, the shitty visuals of the show don't change that. In fact, this is probably the most frustrating thing about the new Berserk adaptation. Everything in that show, except for the visuals, is pretty damn great. The pacing is good. The action is good. The voice work is outstanding. The soundtrack by Shiro Sagisu is amazing. Much more effectively used and fitting, more fitting for the specific scenes than in parts of the first season. The actual direction of the fight scenes is sometimes pretty captivating and creative. It's such a shame. It constantly reminds you as a viewer of the experience that it could have been, but because of the shitty animation, it never becomes the show I wanted it to be. And I have to wonder if all of this had to happen the way it did. If they had at least tried to bring a traditionally animated version of that show into existence, if that could have been circumvented, even if they were like, oh, maybe we couldn't like bring over all of Miura's style, which I doubt, like maybe not all its intricacies, but the essence. I think even the old Berserk show, even with its limited budget, did a pretty damn good job at bringing over Miura's style into animation form. And if you consider modern 2D animation techniques and everything, and the consistency that is possible with that, I think I think a really good traditional 2D animated adaptation would have been possible, even with a more limited budget.
It just kind of takes me aback a bit that, you say this is a studio that hasn't really, done the lead production on a show before, and then they decide, hey, let's tackle something huge that tons of people know and love, like Berserk. It just seems like maybe you should have shopped around a little bit more for a different studio that had a little bit more experience. And even if they did try to do the same CG route, I don't know. It just seems like, I've said this 1,000 times, and I know people will agree, being a Berserk fan is suffering.
Yeah, indeed, it is.
So maybe someday, in 100 years, when we're both dust, Berserk will finally get the adaptation it deserves. But it doesn't seem like that's happening anytime soon.
I mean, yeah. And like you said, I'm not sure even if everything worked out for them, like, or if all their plans and the tech did the thing it was supposed to do and everything, that it would have looked like, I mean, it probably would have looked better, but would it have looked good enough, comparable to, I don't know, mid-tier 2D animated thing? do they have enough experience to make it good? I mean, I look at the 3D CG shows like Aijin, I think, or Knights of Sidonia, and those are not shows that are like ridiculed for their CG, except, by me. And yeah, and I'm looking at the shows like, okay, these are well-regarded CG shows, and if Berserk looked like that, I still wouldn't be satisfied.
Isn't Knights of Sidonia well-regarded?
I think it is. I think, some people are saying, okay, the visions are not the best, but it's a good show. I think I haven't heard that much negative stuff about it.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm looking at those shows. I'm like, no, even if it had looked like that, no, thank you. I'd rather have seen something, not maybe on the maybe on the level like of a low Studio Dean thing, but maybe mid-tier MAPPA stuff or metal stuff or something like that. I don't know. I would have rather see them try to, see those studios try their hand at this with traditional animation, or maybe a hybrid like 2D and 3D animation, like some shows have successfully done. For example, Tales of Systeria. Though to be fair, that probably had a much bigger budget than Berserk did. Bandai Namco money and everything. But yeah, I mean, they tried, but I still wonder what it would have looked like if they, tried their hand at another 2D adaptation. Like I said, yeah, some of the stuff wouldn't probably had the detailed look of its source material, but guess what? Neither does this clusterfuck. Maybe it wouldn't have had a consistent look of character and background arc, but guess what? Neither does this dumpster fire. But at least the dialogue scenes would have looked normal, and with some, like I said, like some 2D character models and 3D environments on the level of Tales of Systeria, or even Taboo 2 or something like that. You could have maybe achieved some of the same dynamic fight scenes, only with, actually good-looking characters. And, I really would love to see the budget this show had, and compare to the budget of evidently really well-animated 2D shows, laden with complex line work, like, for example, Mob Psycho, or One Punch Man, or even My Hero Academia. My Hero Academia has pretty simple character designs, but there are a lot of scenes in that show where you see the characters, you see shots of the characters' faces that are really line-heavy. And that must be hard to animate and everything. And I remember an interview with the staff of One Punch Man after everyone was saying, oh man, the show looks so good, it must have cost a ton. And it turns out it didn't. It had an average budget. It was just handled by experienced, competent people who, knew what they were doing and were invested enough to give their very best. And I feel that this Berserk show in its core was also done by people who wanted to give their best, but for many reasons couldn't. Be it because of misguided ambition or inexperience or tech problems. And all that is really irritating and sad and a waste. Okay, I think I'm done. Sorry for that giant rant of a review, but this show made me feel many things. Mostly anger. I will link the Anime News Network article I was referencing earlier in the episode in our episode description, which, by the way, is always worth checking out, because we always put a few interesting articles from sites like ANN, Crunchyroll, and Anime Now, for example, in there that give some additional info on the shows we review. So yeah, always check those out. Check those links out. The easiest way is probably to go to our site, animebrainfreeze.com. You can find all the articles in the corresponding posts for the episode releases there. And yeah, I will definitely put the article in there. It's worth a read, definitely, even if I don't agree with all of the stuff said in there. Yeah, I don't know if there will be another season of Berserk. It hasn't been announced yet, as far as I know. I highly doubt it. The show tanked hard, and rightfully so. But we'll see. I mean, at the last episode it says, and the story continues, but that might as well describe the manga when it does, when it actually continues.
How many seasons will we be on a boat?
Yeah, I don't know. Probably not that many. That's not that many chapters. It just took Miura a long time to draw them. But yeah, right now, there's nothing more to say, thank God. But then to stay away from this adaptation, It's a big shame, but unless you don't mind the crappy visuals for some reason, this version of Berserk is not worth your time.
So we kind of go from one disappointment to, I don't know, maybe not so much a disappointment, but more indifference with Sword Oratoria.
You sounded underwhelmed the other day when you talked about it.
Yeah, I don't believe we talked about Danmachi previously, did we?
No.
Danmachi, which is the previous series, we'll kind of gloss over that so you get the essential background information.
Which is, by the way, the maybe we haven't mentioned the full English title of Danmachi yet.
That is true. That is true. Well,
there's a reason for that because it's incredibly long.
As is par for the course for light novel titles, the Japanese name is Dungeon ni Deai Motomeru no Machigateru Daroka. In English, if you're not a complete weeb, is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon? Which, kind of looking back on the name, sort of a misnomer, because I really sort of feel like there's only two main love interests in this series, and one of them is, not really part of the picture. All right, misnomers aside, it's a story about this kid, Bell Crannel. And he's this young man who hopes to become like the greatest adventurer in the land. He lives in the city Orario, and within Orario there is the titular dungeon that seems to defy physics. It's weird because it goes, it seems like it should go further underground than it realistically should, but whatever. That's neither here nor there.
Maybe pocket dimensions and everything.
I mean, that could be. So basically, the dungeon has just kind of been there since time immemorial for, whatever reason. Use your imagination. And people travel down into it to become stronger, to gather riches, but, obviously it's a dark, dank, dangerous dungeon filled with all sorts of monsters and shit, so, it's not exactly a walk in the park. So within Orario, there are basically several guilds called familia, and each familia reports to basically a god or a goddess, and there's, a whole bunch of these. Belle reports to the goddess Hestia, which, if you've seen art of her, she kind of... The internet sort of memed her into the ground back when the show started. But yeah, he is the only member of his guild. Oops. Again, there's a lot of things in this series that really aren't really adequately explained, and I'm going to get into that later on too. And basically, Belle wants to, help make a better name for his guild, but even though he's just this little piss kid that no one wants to really give the time of day to, but he ends up at one point training under the sword princess Eyes Wallenstein. There's a name for you.
That's a mouthful.
And that kind of sort of brings us towards Sword Oratoria, which is the story of Eyes Wallenstein. It sort of runs parallel to Danmachi. It's, like I said, the story of Eyes, and she's known, by many for her elegant demeanor and her skill with sword and sorcery. And she one day meets Bell, and seeing his resolve to become stronger and more self-sufficient, she also aspires to, better herself, even though she's already, really super powerful, but, not quite powerful enough. So the beginning of the story sort of is Eyes and the members of her guild are traveling through the dungeon, and there's... on certain floors of the dungeon, there's basically settlements or towns like more or less safe houses that you can stop at. And in one of these towns, they discover that there's been this murder. And during the investigation of this murder, it's sort of made apparent that the perpetrator knows like secrets about Ai's past, and that sort of serves as the impetus for this journey.
Oh, so it's a murder mystery. I didn't know that.
Only at first.
Oh, okay. Well, now that's a shame. I was, you just caught me with that. That sounded interesting.
I mean, it starts off neat, but I have. Let me talk about the fact that I like that there are parallels between this and the first series, and you see scenes. They're like, oh, hey, okay, so that's where this happens in line with the other story, and that's cool, and I appreciate that, and I like that a lot. The character designs are all pretty good. The animation is, for the most part, pretty decent. The fight scenes look really good, actually. So,
which studio's working on that?
It's our pals at JC Staff.
Oh, all right.
So we have a studio with experience under their belt, that's fine. That's cool. What don't I like about this show? Well, after a couple of years of kind of putting Danmachi out of my mind, it really tries to jump back in way too quick for its own good. It's like, hey, you remember these characters, right? No? Here we go anyway. Which kind of works to its detriment, which is weird. Because something like Attack on Titan, which had a 4-year break, I don't know, maybe because Attack on Titan was a lot more prolific and on the whole a lot more interesting, I feel like it didn't work against it as much as this does. There's a lot of plot breadcrumbs, as it were, that don't really lead anywhere too.
Okay.
Like we have this one character who's like, oh, you are Aurora, and it's like that was my mother's name. I'm not her. Blah, your past, your destiny, blah, and it's not really fleshed out at all. We have these villains that are wringing their hands in the background, and it's not really made clear, where they're like, oh, at some point it's like, oh, we're going to destroy Aurario, or oh, we're going to take over the world, and it's like, it's not really super clear what their motives are or why they're going after who they are.
Is that maybe a build-up for possible coming seasons, or? Well,
there's a lot of. I mean, they kind of ended on this cliffhanger, but it's a lot of build-up to absolutely nothing.
That's a shame. Huh.
Like there's not much resolution to anything within. There's just a bit at the end where it's like, come to the 59th floor of the dungeon if you want to, fight me. And they fight this huge monster before they get down there, and they don't even get to that point. Like, Sword Oratoria, I think, has like 9 or 10 novels right now. And this series covers like the first 4, because I think there's some plot towards the end that I'm not entirely certain about since I haven't read the novels, but that it seems like they might have either missed or glossed over, because it just feels like, hey, maybe you could have picked up the pacing a little bit more so you didn't leave us on this really weird thread that just doesn't leave me super interested in coming back.
Maybe there was no really good part to stop, because the way the story is structured, one breadcrumb, like you said, leads to another, and there are a lot of red herrings and everything. Does the initial hook, like the initial crime, does that at least get solved to an extent, or?
I mean, we find out who's behind it, and then a lot of the story ends up being pursuing this one character, and then, like I said, the shadows wringing their hands in the background that may or may not have something to do with it. The show has some pacing issues.
Okay.
It feels a little confusing, and I'm just going to throw this out there. Ai's story is really not that interesting.
Oh, that's a shame. So she's not a good main character.
Yeah, I mean, it's neat to see her and Belle play off of each other, but I don't feel like she can carry her own story.
Danmachi was mainly comedy focused, right?
Yeah, I mean, it had comedy and some action in there.
Okay. So this is, mostly, Sword Oratoria is mostly a serious thing? Is there still a bit of comedy in there? Did they maybe not know how to do a serious story properly?
I mean, possibly. There's still, like, little bits of goofiness in there, but...
Is Bell even in this? Like,
he is in...
out of the characters in there?
Yeah, we do see some of the characters from the... some of the main characters, I should say, from the original series, briefly, in some snippets. We get to see Bell's shining moment of kick-assery, where he unloads just a whole bunch of fireballs into the gut of a giant minotaur, and that's fucking cool, I'm not gonna lie. Sword Oratoria has a different director, and I wonder if that might have been part of the issue, but it's got a lot of the same other staff, so...
Are the light novels written by the same author that wrote, the original Danmachi?
Yeah, it's all written by the same person, Fujino Omori. So, I don't know.
Sure, might have been the director. It might just be the story itself, and maybe it's harder to adapt because there's not that much happening, and it's more like mystery for parts, and then the hunt for the actual culprit gets, resolved much faster in the book. Hard to say without having read it.
Yeah, it begs a lot of questions, both on, the story side and the production side. I mean, it doesn't have the production issues that Berserk had.
What shows do?
But a lot of it feels really wanting and needs more fleshing out. I mean, I have a feeling there's probably going to be more anime adaptation of it because, as far as I knew, people, enjoyed Danmachi. I don't think it's like the hottest light novel on the market, but it's popular enough to have a series and a spin-off. So,
is the original Danmachi wrapped up, or is that still getting stuff?
I'm pretty sure that's still running.
I mean, did that even have a real story to speak of, or at least in terms of having an actual plot line through? It sounded like Sword Oratoria was actually trying to do something like that, and the original Danmachi apparently was more,
the original Danmachi.
Comedy.
Yeah, the original Danmachi is more just like an action comedy, fun romp. This is trying to be. I think it's trying to be more than it should be. Now that I'm thinking about it, and that's a shame because I don't know if I was super looking forward to more of this, but, I was like, hey, sure, I'll check it out. I don't know if some of my enjoyment was a little marred by by Anime Strike.
Oh, okay. What did they do?
Well, Anime Strike is, long and short, is Amazon's anime service. And they seem to not understand how to upload stuff on a schedule the way, Crunchyroll does and stuff.
Neither does Netflix.
Oh, we could go on. I could go on about that and how disappointed I am that if I want to watch Fate Apocrypha and Kakegurui legit, gotta wait 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
But that's a discussion. Oh, jeez, that was almost my box of Kleenex, everybody. That's a discussion for another time, though. Anime Strike, when they upload stuff, it's like, if you're lucky, it's on time. If you're not, you could be waiting anywhere from 12 hours to 3 days to get to watch what you want. And, by that point, with a show that I was very lukewarm on, it was kind of like, all right. To be frank, I'm surprised I didn't get to a point where I dropped this show, but I honestly don't feel like it's worth fully putting in the trash stash because, again, if it were fleshed out a little more, I feel like it could be more than what it is.
I don't know, maybe things, unlike Berserk, again, this has maybe a higher chance to improve upon on itself in a possible second season. especially, if they pick up the pacing and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds to me like that was the main problem for you, and they need to go somewhere actually with the story and get some actual resolutions in there and everything, and maybe give the main character a bit more of an, I don't know, interesting story development and everything.
Yeah, as said, Eyes is a neat side character, but as a main character, she needs a little bit more going for herself than I need to be stronger than everyone else.
Yeah, that's not super interesting.
I mean,
who has done that before?
Yeah. So I mean, if you like Danmachi, and I mean, it's, I liked it because it was goofy and it didn't take itself seriously. I mean, maybe you might like this, but you gotta understand that it's trying to tell a different kind of story. So.
And apparently doesn't really succeed in doing that.
Not very well.
And that is a wrap on the 34th episode of Anime Brain Freeze. All the music in our show is from the Double Dragon Neon soundtrack by the amazing Jake Kaufman. Please go to vit.bandcamp.com and check out his awesome work. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and animebrainfreeze.com. Leave us comments and questions anywhere you like, or send an email to animebrainfreeze@gmail.com. We would love to read your feedback. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you had a good time, and please join us again on our next show. Macht's gut.
Take care, everybody.
Next time on Anime Brain Freeze.
A little story about a witch with a big dream.
And a callow witch and a bestial mercenary form an unlikely partnership to bring magic to the world.